Hello, I hope you're well. Thanks for attending this webinar about managing risk while getting shot at, or also known as you have the time to conduct a proper risk assessment. Before we get going, I first want to thank you for attending this webinar, who will be less a demonstration like I've done in previous webinars, and more a discussion about how some of the concepts from military risk management can transfer well to a corporate environment. Also, thank you, Alex, for the invitation for Risk Awareness Week 2020. Still think it's a great event, and if you got time, please, everyone, go and listen to a few of the other presenters. There's some very, very interesting stuff out there. So, today, I will present a different angle on risk management. As you know, military is good to deal with uncertainty, either because the situation is always so complex, and we deal with an adversary which adapt to what we're doing, or because military is basically a bunch of sleep-deprived people shambling around in the fog of war, trying to manage complex job in challenging environment. No matter what, there's a lot of uncertainty in military operation. So military is doing some good risk management and integrating risk management in decision making for a long time. Personally, my experience, I was a non-commissioned member of the Canadian Forces. I was a combat engineer, so the job is to provide mobility to friendly troops, deny the same to the enemy, and make sure that friendly troops can survive, all the while acting as an infantryman as a secondary role when required. So it's a pretty interesting job, dealing with explosive, mines, IEDs, support to assault operation, things like that. And today I'll leverage that perspective, so from a quite junior leadership role at that time, how risk management was useful to me, and how can you transfer some of the tools I was using to your more normal, usual problems. We'll be talking also about example from Bosnia, so an example of a risk management process that was used over there to deal with landmines, and how to do a risk assessment in a rush, like I had to do while in Afghanistan. So let's pick this up with the first step, which is a different angle on risk management. So what are some of the tools and the mindset that's being used in the military to deal with uncertainty? So as you're conducting a preparation for a mission in the military, we've got what is called a battle procedure, which is a repeatable set of steps that you apply in order to receive what's the mission, analyze it, and then make sure you do your planning, make sure that your people are ready to do the mission, and then you roll out. So it's just a standard planification process. A part of this is the mission analysis. And a good thing with mission analysis is it enables you to address some risk management methods when you're facing someone. So most risk management methods that we're using today are not always that good to take in consideration what the other guy is doing, what the competition is doing. Once again, you don't need someone shooting at you to make it a competitive scenario. Obviously, any business is dealing with competitors. And when you're doing your own strategic planning on your own risk management, you should be considering what the other person is doing. That's quite important. If not, your strategy might go, what might be not exactly the best in that case. I know there's a big field of research, which is game theory, which provides some mathematical tools in order to basically address situation where you have two people facing each other. I like game theory a lot. I think there's a lot of opportunities to go deeper in that field. But so far, my take on this is that it's a little bit theoretical, because for game theory model to work, you need to be in a very constrained environment. With, okay, let's say for example, some games are people are taking their turns one after each other and adapting at that point. So that works, but most of real life is more fluid, is more complex than that. Also, with game theory, you need to take some pretty big assumptions when you're applying it. And last, military-wise at least, if you're stuck in a muddy trench under rain, preparing a complex operation when you're cold, you're tired, you're hungry, you're miserable, you're likely to start pondering about deep reflection about which type of distribution should I bring to my model. Am I better to go log normal or Weeble or for modeling? Same thing with game theory. Start thinking about the options and give them potential weight, it's not always the best to take spot on decisions. So game theory works, modeling works in some cases, but sometimes you just don't know what's in the other guy's head. So key point here is you can't always put mathematics to risk management. You should try as much as you can, but when you can't, you make sure that you can always apply systematic thinking. And for the military, here's the battle procedure, and I won't bore you to death by passing every step of the battle procedure, but high level, you receive some preliminary information, you go and ask your people to start maybe preparing a few things because you know you might be going out to do X task. Then you get more information, you do your analysis of the map, of the time, of the constraints, then you draft your plan, you get your plan to your team, you prepare your team, conduct some rehearsal maybe so people are ready to execute. It's funny, step 16, forced rest is most of the time the one you'll skip because hey, you don't sleep that much on the tour. And you conduct final briefing and then you go out and you execute your mission. For today, the interest for risk management is the mission analysis bit, which we'll be diving a little bit deeper into. So a mission analysis is basically a systematic process to assess the context of your mission, then the factors in deduction. So factors could be weather, could be, for example, strength of the enemy or things like that. And from there, you're doing deductions. And this is helping you draft your plan, basically. And it's the same in business, really. You have a mission, which could be, if you're a nonprofit, for example, maybe your mission is to increase the literacy rate of a region by 10%, for example. So here's your mission. Then you take a look at your factors. So do you have infrastructure you can rely on? Are there schools? Are there teachers? What are the reasons that you see that people can't attend school, for example? And you do deduction out of that. So this is how those factors could impact your plan. And here you go, and you can do the same thing if you're a for-profit corporation, basically. So your mission analysis is really a reflection on your mission and on the context where it goes out. From your mission analysis, that's going to help you to get what we call course of action in the military. A course of an action is an option. And you should always draft option, obviously, when you're in business. So what are your options or ways of achieving your mission? Once again, not only stuck with military thinking here, your mission might be to launch a new product or to create a project, for example. So you create your various course of action. Because you're taking the time to do that reflection about your position, you're thinking about what are their goals, how they typically achieve their goals. Is it likely that they're going to surprise you with something? Well, as you're doing that, you get a second outcome of course of action, which is the potential course of actions or options of your adversary, of your enemy, basically. So that's something that's quite useful because you put yourself in the shoes of that other force, that competitor that you're having, be it once again in business or in the military. So what could they do? So that's the second, another thing that's getting out of the mission analysis. And then you cross both of them and you use those two to generate insight. And I'm going to show you an example about how you can do that. But one thing you need, and when you're doing that, is you need really to put yourself in the shoes of your opponent. Let's say, for example, that you have a restaurant and there's another restaurant in town, and you really want to understand what are they likely to do. So you need to gain some understanding of the motives and the means and the personality of your position. And that's something you don't get if you're doing a standard risk register based approach. You don't necessarily get into that type of thinking as in depth. So you have your course of action or options, you have the one of your opponent, and then you cross those to try to understand how could this impact my mission. And we'll do a quick example of that just to show you what can be done. And it's not something that's complicated, but it can get into some pretty interesting discussion when you're doing this on your own situation. So our example is we're Jolly Chicken. We're a great chicken restaurant, and Papa Chicken is the nefarious competition we have. We don't like Papa Chicken too much, but those are basically the other guy in town that sells chicken and try to beat us. So first thing is you're gonna have on your left here, in the left column, you have the three course of action you developed. So based on discussion, analysis, you say, okay, I can rebrand my Jolly Chicken restaurant, make it better looking, for example, tweak a few things in the recipe, whichever works. Course of action 2 here is I can open a new location on Lark Street, another part of town. So I try to expand and see if I can get there. And option 3 to secure my business and gain more money out of it is partnering up with a food chain, for example, and we sell our product to the food through the normal grocery stores. Maybe it's the spice rub, our secret spice rub, for example. So those are my course of action that I'm seeing. I could have more. I know military often say just draft the 3, draft as many as you need for the type of operation that you're doing. Same would go in business. So those are our own options. Next step is take a look at what the opposition is doing. So typically the military try to break it down in the first 2 you're covering are the most likely adverse course of action. So this is what they're the most likely to do. Then the second one you break down is to the most dangerous adverse course of action. So what's the worst case scenario for me? And then you can go for the most optimistic or the blue sky scenario. What's the best? Because you don't want to overcommit if you don't need to. You don't want to put too much resource if you don't need to, because resources in the military or in business, they're always limited, right? So you don't want to put too much resources for something that may absolutely not be an issue. So most optimist is something you can put, and then you could put other course of action if you had any more. So those are some of the outcomes of that reflection, that deep thinking you're doing when you're doing a mission analysis. Now you cross them. And once again, I'm absolutely not a commercial specialist in chicken restaurant. I just took that a blend example. But once you have this, you cross, for example, our course of action 1, rebrand the restaurant, ours, against Papa Chicken opening another restaurant. So here, out of discussion and thinking and reflection, well, we say we may lose some market shares on the current segments. If they're opening up a new restaurant, maybe you're going to start poaching some of our customers. But us, by rebranding, we may gain a new crowd. Maybe, I don't know, the millennium are more interested in the new revamped Jolly Chicken restaurant. Still with the rebranding, the current Jolly Chicken restaurant, well, if they're going for a massive expansion, we may lose some of the market shares. Maybe it's only a minor gain on new crowds, because since they're going to have multiple locations opening up, maybe the new crowd will see, I don't have to go as far to get some chicken, so it's all right for me to move to Papa Chicken because it's more convenient if there's one near home. And the most optimistic adverse course of action is they don't do anything, so we just increase market share and we keep our current customers. And you would be doing this for every intersection between your potential options and their potential options. It's a form of scenario analysis, really, but once again, considering the guy in front. On a typical military operation, those options could be the way you get into the area where you need to do the mission, or it could be if you're doing bridging as a combat engineer, you may decide different types of bridges, different bridge sites, and then you'd say, well, what are the enemy possibilities, which could be full-blown attack, harassment fire. Could be they decide to pull back and just leave some booby traps around or things like that. So this is the way you'd be doing your intersection between your plan and their plan. But as you see, it's something that you can do for chicken restaurant, for expansion project, things like that. So this is for the this is just how you oppose those course of actions. Another tool that's being used in the military and in the intelligence sector in general is a signpost analysis. So coming from the intelligence community, it was used for example, to predict rebellion or to predict a significant event like a regime falling, for example. It's a good tool for long-term risk, which slowly materialize. So something that it's basically the frog in the boiling water pot, where you don't see the signs before it's too late, and then you didn't act and you get took by surprise. So this is done for a long-term strategic risk that can have big impact on your organization. I'm going to give you an example from my current employment where we're tracking the risk of autonomous vehicle, because it's something that eventually is going to happen and it can have an impact on our business. So we are tracking this trend in the long term to see when are we close to having to suffer from this, and how can we adapt against it? A signpost analysis is a very useful method against confirmation bias, where, as you know, confirmation bias is when you're having information, you try to only pick and choose the information which is supporting your own opinion. And that's something that's quite scary, because we all have opinions, and if we don't keep open-minded, we will only pick the information that suits us. This is why it's important to gather data from various media sources, from various people with different political opinion, for example, because that way you protect yourself against confirmation bias. Well, when you take the time to identify the various milestones in a signpost analysis, you're actually protecting yourself a little bit against that confirmation bias. And also, last thing is, before last thing is, it requires some deep thinking to do that. And once again, deep thinking is something that we tend to forego in this age of everything super quick. But deep thinking is what can prepare you for those long-term threats. You need to take the time to analyze them. It's not only gut feel, because gut feel won't serve you well for those situations. And your signpost analysis needs to be maintained over time. You'll see on the next slide how it's structured, but you gotta make sure that, do I have to add additional milestones? And so you need to maintain it. So what does it look like, a signpost analysis? Well, first you got your current situation, where you're starting from, and you've got the event that you're anticipating. Impact for climate changes, like I was saying, a rebellion in a foreign country, a competing commercial product which could be dangerous for us. For example, well, it's easy in retrospect. It's hindsight is 100% vision. But if you're a taxi owner and you see Uber coming, you might want to protect yourself against it, or try to figure out things out. So that should have been done a few years back. But so you need to identify what you are anticipating, and then from those you're gonna identify early warning signs, which are your milestones or your signpost markers. You don't need to have a set number, but you have various milestones which could be more or less important, more or less strong as a predictor, but together they give you a good idea when things will materialize. For example, if let's start with, you are owning a building and you want to see, do I have major structural issues which could lead to a collapse and injury? So from there, you can identify your various, here we've got 5 milestones, as the doors or windows are jamming in their frame. You can't open them up properly anymore. Cracks separating foundations, ground movement around the building. Walls are getting out of alignment, and floors or roof are sagging. So one of those might not be an indicator of major structural problems, but as you get more and more, it shows you that you are going toward structural issues. That's an example for a physical building. It can be used for if you're conducting a project and you're afraid of project blowout, so the big cost overrun. Maybe some of your milestone could be the scope definition is not as clear as we thought it was, so that could be a milestone. Project key positions are still not filled, that would be a second milestone. You have a high turnover of experienced staff, so they're leaving before things are crashing. Project sponsor is disengaged, you can't reach him anymore, and some key milestone in the schedule are slipping. So those could all be early warning signs that eventually it should inform you that this risk is starting to materialize, and then you can decide what step you're taking to prevent that. If you can, try to put measurable targets, something solid in those early warning signs, so in those milestones in your signpost analysis. An example for that, for example, if you're worrying about smart cars, well, you should be really interested about the price of LiDAR, because as LiDAR prices are going down, it makes it overall technology more affordable. And in that case, well, you know that eventually when it's going to be cheap enough, and that the regulator will be open about it completely, and that it will be working in the type of environment where you're working in. For example, California is way easier to build smart cars, I think, than Canadian winters or Michigan winters. So you put your different milestones in perspective, and then you're gonna know, okay, it's accelerating or it's already nearly upon us. It forces you to take a look at long-term trends which are slow to advance, so it's easy to forget about them. So that's the signpost analysis. Another thing with the military is it's important to have a common understanding of the plan. This is very, very important, because if not everyone is understanding the plan the same fashion, they can't challenge it. And if they can't challenge it, well, obviously you run the risk of having a poor plan that will be flawed. It's a common misconception that the military do as they're told and shut up, but it's not the case. Military leadership is actually a remarkable exercise in decentralization, where you're pushing a mission and an intent, so everything's converging to the same objective, but the way to execute that mission is getting delegated as low as possible in the organization. And that's the way you remain agile, because the first casualty of any firefight will be the plan most of the time. Then your radio probably, but still you need to be able to push on, and that's part of resilience. We'll talk a little bit about resilience later, but so to have a resilient and agile organization, you need to make sure that people can adapt on the fly. They understand where you're going, but they have the autonomy to react quickly and not go up 10 level up in the chain of command before they get the authorization to do the best thing for the operation or for the business, if you're applying this to business planning. So in the military, there's a time-honored tool which is called a rock drill. And here are a couple of pictures from different militaries where you see they actually build a mock-up of the site where you're going to do an operation, and you're either having small blocks of woods or rocks or little vehicles or whatever in order to simulate the different elements you have in your operation, and from that you run through the plan. So this is typically done after everyone has done their first version of the plan. You create that mock-up, then you have all the key leaders around the table, and you challenge, you enact the plan, and then you challenge it. So how you do this is, okay, well, phase one, you're going to move the vehicles there, and you're going to do this, and this team will go and secure a fire position on that location. And so you got all the various steps of your operation, and you ask for contingency. Okay, well, everyone around the rock drill is able to say, okay, well, if we lose that vehicle, we're losing, for example, our repeater for communication or whatever is it you're losing. Maybe it's your electronic countermeasure, something like that. Well, okay, what's happening now? And you stress test every step of the plan. It's a little bit like having devil's advocate, but everyone is making devil's advocate because everyone is vested in succeeding in the operation and bringing back everyone alive. So as you're doing this, you're having a ton of devil's advocate because no one wants the plan to be flawed. And if you got a good open communication around that mock-up, you don't feel it personal if someone's poking holes in your plan. You want people to poke holes in your plan to make sure it's bulletproof, and so to ensure that you have a good execution on the ground. So the rock drill is something that's done for large operation or even smaller attacks or interventions, but it's something that you can take that, bring it to your project. Bring it to your business environment about, okay, well, the plan to launch the new phone is to do this and this and this and this. You challenge everyone's understanding of the plan because you need everyone pushing in the same direction. And for that, you need everyone to understand the plan and share that common understanding of the plan. And also you want to make sure that holes are poked into the plan to make sure that is it solid or not. So it's risk management because it's ensuring that you avoid some of the bias of having only one person doing the planning and only seeing his way of doing the task. It makes sure that everyone is able to support the plan and de-risk things that pop up along the way. You're more resilient because everyone's sharing that understanding of the plan, and you stress test it against everything. And it leads to interesting things, interesting discussion. So that's for the using a rock drill. Once again, you don't need to have actual rocks on your board conference table, but you want to make sure that you have the people walking through the plan and trying to make sure that they all understand it and that they have that safe space in order to voice their concerns about the plan. Once again, this should lead to discussion about solutions so you can adapt your plan afterward. So Yours will probably not be as dusty as the examples here, but this is basically, in a sense, the rug drill. Now let's talk quickly about controls. And I'm not talking about the 3 lines of defense model here, but controls is anything you put in place, obviously, to protect yourself against risk. And in the military, an important piece of how you set up a defensive position is what we call defense in depth. So here you have some drawings from World War I, and you had basically no man land and wire obstacle. So that's barbed wire to prevent someone from crawling. Then you get frontline trenches where you have people ready to shoot. And then you have all those communication trenches leading to other lines of defense in the trenches, other trenches. And then you get your artillery, and you could have some mines in there. And it gets to be layer after layer after layer of control. Just a little bit like a castle, basically, where you have the ditch, you have the walls, you have the dungeon. So you have the various layers of controls to make sure that someone needs to pay the price to pass through. Or in the case of controls in a business environment, you need multiple things to fail in order to have the catastrophic event you're trying to prevent. So this is an example of when you're thinking about controls and risk management. Well, obviously having a single control is not good, or having multiple controls that are not independent, it's not good either. For example, if all my fire suppression system requires one power source and there's no backup, well, it's possible that they're going to all fail at the same time. So you want all those layers of control. You want a mix of controls that are independent. You want them one after the other, so it's not a single control failing that will lead you to the event. And you want those controls to be robust, to be available, and not to be easy to bypass. So once again, that mix of human and engineering control, you need that mix. Another thing with the military is built-in resilience. Resilience is something that's going to enable you to spring back up quickly after a bad event. And the military is used to chaos. So there's multiple ways that the military implement in order to mitigate that risk of not being resilient enough. Cross-training between roles, for example. In the Canadian military, everyone can pick up a machine gun, everyone can pick up the radio, everyone can pick up the compass and do some navigation. So everyone can do some first aid. So you can rotate roles quickly if needs be. Then missions are stress tests, like we saw in the rock drill, for example. It's clear that the mission, we always try to devise multiple ways to reach the mission, multiple ways, a course of action that can result in success. There's also that fight against you won't have a resilient organization able to react quickly if you have a blame culture. And in the military, they've been working hard on making sure it's not a zero defect culture where someone is not allowed to do mistakes in training, for example. You're encouraged to take some chances, and taking those chances will build the resilience in someone to take the tough calls, even if there's no perfect solution to that problem. You need to try stuff to win. So the goal is to avoid people freezing like deer in the headlights. So there's that whole thing about try to do things. You need to take some calculated risk in order to reach your mission. Another thing that the military is doing to make sure that it's resilient is to do standardized response. So drills. So you repeat the drills until it's muscle memory. You increase the resilience by putting some more resources than what would be needed. Because once again, you got to remember that resilience, it has a cost. If you're trained to do the job of the people on both sides of you in the organization, and as well as you're one step up, there's a cost in there in training. Resilience is the enemy of efficiency. But at some point, if you're resilient, you have a greater chance on the long run to have success in your business. An example of something that would cost extra is when you're adding redundancy. I know redundancy is a terrible word in business where you're only focusing on your short-term margins, but redundancy in some case, if it's intelligent redundancy, will help you. A small example from the military, we used to say in demolition when using explosive and talking about initiation set, so what triggers the main charge. The mathematic we're using is 2 is 1 and 1 is 0. meaning that if you only have one initiation set, it's likely it can fail. If you have two, you have a much higher likelihood of succeeding and not having a misfire, which is not something you want happening most of the time. So it costs more to have two initiation sets, but that redundancy is helping you in order to achieve your mission. Also, another thing is we need to constantly reassess our control. So the way you constantly reassess your control, you gotta understand that the adversary is evolving as well. He wants to beat you. He is after you. He's intelligent. It's just like cybersecurity and hackers. It keeps evolving. You get observed on your tactics, techniques, and procedures, what we call TTPs, and it evolves over time. For example, the IRA in Ireland used timers for their bombs initially. They were not always reliable, and they eventually switched to remote control improvised explosive device using radio frequencies. Well, to that, the United Kingdom forces starting to deploy countermeasures to jam and prevent the signals from activating. So the IRA switched to a radar gun and a radar detector in order to trigger their RCID, for example. So it always keep evolving. So you need to reassess your controls, especially if you're in a context where you're against an active opponent. If you're talking about controls in a plant, for example, on a well understood technology, it's likely that you won't need to do that many changes to your control structure. As long as you comply with regulation, you make sure your controls are well maintained, that your work instructions are well used. So you could still do those checks, but you don't go into full reassessment of are your controls still effective. So enough about the general theory and high-level example. Let's go to Bosnia, where I was deployed as a ops and NCO a few years back, when the biggest threat in Bosnia was landmines at that point. And this is where I've done my first real live risk assessment, which was about not getting people blown up. So talk about the steep learning curve. I was around 22, 23 at that point, and the challenge was, how do you assess if it's safe to go in a region when there's mine, basically? And obviously it was with coalition forces. We had Dutch and British soldiers, and we had people from Chile and Canadian, and obviously you don't want to injure anyone. So this is a little bit the thought process. So landmines, it's a plague. It's a terrible invention. One of the worst things that happens to mankind in my mind. They're there for a long time. When I was working in Bosnia, we still had 1.3 million mines in the ground. UXOs as well, so unexploded ordnance, booby traps, and those things are there for several dozen years when they're laid in the ground. So it's a major issue in Bosnia, and you can't just stop operations, right? Risk management must not be a source of analysis paralysis. You can't say, well, you won't go anywhere, we'll just stay in camp, because then you're not helping rebuild the country. It's a little bit with project risk management or strategic risk management or operational risk management. You cannot say no to everything. You need to help the business take the best decision so it achieves its goal, but it's well placed on that risk reward curve. And that's something that's, if you're only working risk management, it's tempting to say no to everything. You don't want to be the person just putting down the brakes. Sometimes you need to put the brakes and stop something, obviously, but you don't want to be paralyzing the whole thing. So you need to strike that balance, and this is why we set that process, which was SOI 3002, in order to enable some of the operation, but still be safe. So the troops that were on the ground were not in danger. You need to have also acumen and expertise when you're doing risk management. You need to understand what you're talking about. You need to be and you won't be the specialist of everything, but got to be a good jack of all trades with a good understanding of the whole process you're analyzing, or the project, or the technology that's involved, or the commercial aspect. So you need to have this. So for Bosnia, here's a map of Bosnia. You see the little red dots there, and it's high level. There's tons of them, but every single little red dot on that map was at that point a minefield. We had also some zone contaminated by exploded ordnances. So first thing you can see by looking at that map is there's a pattern. And that comes back to acumen and expertise. If you're to help take calls about minefield, here when you see that there are some heavy concentrations of minefield, and then what my mouse is just doing right now is basically the separation between the Federation and the Republika Srpska. So those were the two main groups at the end of the war, and you see that they've laid down minefields in order to secure some locations. So minefields are not randomly spread. There's patterns. If you know your history of the conflict, you'll know them. But also you'll see that there are some minefields a little bit all over the place. So your prediction, your patterns is not 100% of the information. So this is first part of expertise and acumen. We were using databases in order to know where were the minefields and what types of mine were there when it was known. Acumen and expertise got to go one step further. Here's a PMA3, which was a Bosnian anti-personnel mine. Won't go into the specific, but those things are creating very nasty injuries, and they're about half the density of water. So that's something that, once again, you need to understand that those things are light. So those things has been proven to float and to still be effective even if they're in water. So in some cases, it's possible that if you have heavy rains, the mine becomes displaced and floats somewhere else. So that acumen is super important, because it's going to show you that if you're in a waterway and you know that there was some minefields upriver, well, there's a possibility that you have some contamination down the river. So something to keep in mind. So how do you deal with that? Basically, we've created a matrix, and it is not a heat map, so don't start bashing. It's more a little bit like as an Eisenhower matrix, where you prioritize stuff based on two axes. So this is the tool that we're using to provide guidance based on the understanding of the situation. So basically we had two criteria. The first one being threat. Threat was, you knew that there was a minefield or a UXO contamination area or booby trap, something like that, within 1 kilometer. So that would say it's a high threat. It's related to those patterns we're seeing on the map. And then we had confidence, which was what the type of ground condition. It could be a high confidence, like it's a well-traveled asphalt road, well-maintained with a lot of visible traffic on it. Well, you'd say it's high confidence. It's highly unlikely that someone will, there's no mine there, because in Bosnia, mines were not being moved by people anymore. It was not like Afghanistan or Iraq, where insurgents were still trying actively to get you. In Bosnia, it was a terrible reminder of the war, but they were staying in location, which means that if it's a tarmac road, no one will put that mine on the road. So that's for high confidence road. A low confidence road or a low confidence area would be, for example, a field which is uncamped and is you see no foot traffic signs in there. So that's, you say, oh, let's be careful, that's low confidence. It's possible that there's mines there. Basically, based on those two criteria, we're just crossing each other. For example, if it's a high threat, low confidence area, that would be a field near known minefields with no people walking there. Well, 10 years after the war, no one's walking in that spot. It's populated because there's a reason. So we'd say we need to clear this. So send in the full demining, either mechanical, manual, or dogs or something like that before you go there. If you had a low threat, low confidence, so there's no known minefield, but it's still something that looks fishy. It's a trail that no one has traveled for years, for example. I would say proof plus. So send combat engineer, maybe in a mine resistant vehicle, to roll on the road, take a look at things, investigate. So before you decide to open it up. And then a high threat, high confidence. Well, you can be on a highway and having a minefield on the side. As long as you don't go off the road, you're safe. So we could still send someone just to check in a vehicle, but it'd be done more quickly. And finally, we have the case where we have a high confidence, low threat area, where basically it means that we know there's no mines. It's a safe road. Well, don't ask, just go. So that was the way we were doing things. So it's a way of structuring a response based on somewhat quantitative and somewhat qualitative criteria, but at least you know what you need to be doing based on the type of situation you are into. So something like this can be done simply in your organization. It worked for us. Now let's go to Afghanistan and let's get into a little bit more action. to show you that you've got time, no matter what you think, no matter how late the project is or how busy people are, you can find the time to do a risk assessment. So I was serving in Afghanistan as a section commander, leading a team of exceptional people as combat engineers. So we're attached to the airborne company, and we're one of the 2 sections attached with them, and we were supporting them in dismounted operation, foot patrols, many types of military operations. And I was leading that team. We were 8 in total, and we were doing the job of finding IEDs, blowing up doors, and constructing strong points and things like that. And the example I'm going to give you is from the first day I got shot at, basically. We're working in Panjshir district in Afghanistan. Basically, at that point, most of Panjshir was not filled with NATO troops. We had the small Canadian presence, and near the we had Kandahar Airfield, which was the main base. And then we had Fob Shumgar, which was a strong point of about 300-400 people at that point. And then for operation base or patrol base Perwan Gar. And we had Hyena Road, which was Foster Road at that point, which was leading deep into the Panjshir Valley. And basically the Foster Road, everything that was west of Perwan Gar was basically the insurgents' country. So we went for an operation which called for us to leave Perwan Gar, and we moved toward the west a little bit on the road. We know we had to clear it, and our goal or mission was to build a strong patrol base or a small outpost for police and local army and some Canadian military. So we had to seize the ground. We knew that the nickname of Route Foster was IED Alley, so improvised explosive device were a common occurrence. So we knew we had to go there, clear the road so all the vehicles could reach there, secure the ground from the enemy, and then build the defenses of the police substation. To do that, risk management wise, once again, get back to the battle procedure, you're trying to de-risk as much as you can. So one thing that was done, we said, okay, let's send a feint in the river in order to attract attention. So they sent in the riverbed on the northern side of the river, Arghandab, they sent a large team in order to attract some of the fighters there, and we were hoping the best fighters and know more of their material. And straight after they got engaged, we were able to push and start clearing the road. So that's just the general context, you understand what we're doing. So our job was initially to move in the vehicle up to what we assess as the most danger point, dismount, start clearing the road while advancing, clearing the enemy and making sure that no bombs were found on the road until we were ready to go to reach the location. And then we're going to set up camp there and start building the following morning the fortifications. So this was a job. And basically, as we advanced, we knew that there was enemy because we got engaged. The feint got engaged, but our main group was engaged multiple times through RPG-7 and machine gun and assault rifle, so AK-47. We got engaged multiple times, and we kept advancing. Before we dismounted the vehicle, we've had the first small IED strike. No one was injured, but it showed that there were some bombs on that road, and there was some enemy. So you have a complex situation because you're trying to look in the ground for a bomb. It's not exactly the same thing as looking for the enemy. So you had both threats to take in consideration. And the way we were set up was we had initially my team on the ground with a few infantry soldiers, and we're clearing the road for visible signs, and I won't get into the specific of how we were clearing those roads, but we had the first vehicle of the convoy after us was a tank with rollers. So you see in front of the tank, there's rollers in order to blow up any IEDs, and that's a way of giving an additional layer of control to make sure that if we miss something, he's going to hit it, and the rollers are damaged, maybe the tank loses a track, but people are safe. But as we get shot at, we had to pull back at the back of that tank. So you get shot at, you peel back, so you fire some, and then you get back to the tank in a controlled fashion. So you put some metal between the insurgents and you, and the tank uses its weapon system. At some point, we reached a big open space, and I had to take the call as a section commander about Am I better to be at the back of the tank with my team, protected against fires, or should I get to the front of the tank with my team? So basically, option one is we're at the back of the tank and we are protected against enemy fire, and we were there for a little while. The tanks got hit, the RPG and things like that, so we knew that it was protecting us somewhat, but you're not as good to find the bombs. Or you push back the people in front of the tank, and then you're exposed to enemy fire more, but you are actually better at finding bombs. And also, this is where I did my little risk assessment. So you're at the back of a vehicle, you've been shot at a couple of times already. You know that things are not easy for the overall operation, and you need to keep pushing forward because you need to hit that point to reach that objective and secure it as fast as you can before they can draw in more fighters while you're exposed as a convoy. So risk analysis wise, option one, well, there's a tank, we're at the back of the tank, and if the tank hits something, a portion of the blast will travel beneath the vehicle and hit the next soft thing that it can find, which in our case was our legs. So that's the first bit of the risk assessment. And the bad thing or good thing about being a specialist with explosives is you understand the dynamic of shockwaves and blasts and things like that. So you say, okay, if it hits something, we're losing our legs. But if I push forward, I'm exposed to, and my team are exposed to small arm fires and RPG-7. And this is where, obviously, I don't have Excel. I don't have at risk or model risk or crystal ball. I don't start coding and trying to figure out probabilities and things like that. But you still need to pass through that risk assessment process. About, okay, I've got two options. What are the possibilities in both cases? Now I'll do my consequences. The whole team I had, we were 6 on the ground because I had 2 in my vehicle at that point. The driver and gunner in my vehicle were way back in the convoy line. So I say, well, okay, option one, if we hit an IED, 6 people probably lose their legs and maybe their lives. Option two, we can still lose some people because we know that there's some firing that being done. And this is where I didn't know at that point what it was, but I've applied Bayesian reasoning. I'm a fairly rational guy, so Bayesian reasoning is basically you take your odds, your prior probability, or what you think is the basic probability of something happening, and then you adjust those odds based on every little bit of information you're gaining in the situation. So instead of taking just a call out of there, I was at the back of the vehicle, sweaty and dusty and thirsty, and the tank was hit. He had lost some optics because he was hit with an RPGs, and the situation is not the best. But then you start thinking, okay, we got about 500-600 meter to do max in that open before we reach back a more constrained space. So far, the enemy's accuracy has not been that good. It looks like it's mostly spray and pray. So it's not like there's a sniper picking off people, but it's not that accurate. And the vehicles are providing some cover, even if I'm not at the back, because they are watching and they are able to shoot if required. So they're providing some covers. And we're on IDLA, so we know there's Taliban, but we know we're on IDLA, so we know that it's highly likely there's going to be other IEDs. Also, we already had a small one happening earlier before we dismounted to clear, so we know that they're there. We know that the feint that's been done in the river should have attracted some of their best fighter, and in that case they did, because sadly we lost Corporal Nathan Hornberg, died during that operation. So we knew that we've pulled some of their tier 1s, their best fighters. So at that point you make your call. You take all those little risk trade-offs and you take yourself in all those elements in consideration. And at that point I said, okay, well, team, we're pushing back in front. I know they're shooting or they're bound to shoot again, but it's safer. We won't hit an IED and we'll lose our leg. So once again, this is Bayesian inference, not done with maths, but done with just plain old common sense. And that's the way I've done a risk assessment while at the back behind a Leopard tank in Afghanistan. In that case, it worked fine for the team. So it shows that if you're on the firefight and you have the time to start thinking rationally about your problem, fairly sure you can do the same for your project, for your business. So take the time to do that risk assessment. It's going to pay off to start engaging, not only going gut feel, but actually engaging that system to thinking about you're more structured, you weigh the pros and cons. It can be done very quickly, but for that you need the process of risk management, but you also need the expertise and the acumen and the understanding of the situation. And that's it's all about trade-off, and that could help you risk management wise. So overall, I wanted to present to you how some of the military thinking can easily translate into civilian risk management. Hopefully you won't have to do risk assessment while getting shot at, but on the other side, it's a good way to take a look at any problem. So thank you very much for your time. Please feel free to ask some question in the chat. I'll answer them, or reach out to me. I'm always interested in a good risk management decision. And remember, you do have the time to conduct your risk assessment. Stay healthy, everyone. Thank you very much.